The City Before the Horror. London. 1888. At the center of the world's largest empire, a killer moved through the streets unnoticed. Not a ghost. Not a monster from fiction. But a real man. Hiding in plain sight. For 10 weeks. The East End district of Whitechapel became the center of a nightmare that Victorian England could barely comprehend. Women were found murdered before sunrise. Their throats cut with horrifying precision. Their bodies mutilated in ways that terrified even experienced investigators. And more than a century later, nobody truly knows who Jack the Ripper was. But what makes this case disturbing isn't just the brutality of the murders. It's the possibility that the killer may never have been hiding at all. At night, Whitechapel felt almost disconnected from the rest of London. Gas lamps struggled to cut through thick fog drifting between narrow alleyways. The streets were crowded even after midnight. Workers, drunks, dock laborers, street gangs, and women searching desperately for enough money to survive another night. By 1888, Whitechapel had become one of the poorest districts in the entire British Empire. More than 80,000 people lived inside overcrowded buildings and crumbling lodging houses. Entire families shared single rooms. Disease spread quickly. Violence was common. And starvation was never far away. For many residents, survival itself was a full-time job. The smell of sewage mixed with smoke from factories and cheap gin houses. Children slept in alleyways. Crime filled the streets after dark. And for women with no money, the options were limited. Some sold matches. Some stole. And many turned to prostitution simply to afford a bed for the night. In Whitechapel, a bed could cost 4 pennies. Those who couldn't afford one often wandered the streets until morning. Some slept in what were known as coffin beds. Tiny wooden spaces stacked side by side. Barely large enough for a person to lie down. Human life had become painfully cheap. And when suffering becomes ordinary, predators become harder to notice. The first murders. At first, the murders did not seem connected. Violence against poor women was tragically common in Whitechapel. But then investigators began noticing details they couldn't ignore. The wounds were too precise. Too deliberate. On August 31, 1888, the body of Mary Ann Nichols was discovered in Bucks Row. At 3:40 in the morning. Her throat had been cut so deeply, it nearly reached the spine. Her abdomen had been ripped open. The attack shocked investigators. But even then, few people realized something far worse was beginning. Mary Ann Nichols had spent her final hours wandering the streets alone. Like many women in Whitechapel, she had nowhere safe to go. No protection. No money. No real chance to escape the dangers surrounding her. At first, police believed the murder was another act of drunken street violence. But 8 days later, another body appeared. Annie Chapman. Found behind 29, Hanbury Street shortly before dawn. The attack was even more disturbing. Her abdomen had been completely opened. And her uterus had been removed. Some investigators believed the killer possessed anatomical knowledge. Perhaps a butcher. A surgeon. Or someone accustomed to cutting flesh. Others disagreed. But everyone understood one terrifying fact. This killer was escalating. The murders no longer felt random. They felt methodical, controlled, and increasingly confident. Residents of Whitechapel began sleeping less. Women walked faster through dark streets. Men carried knives for protection. Every stranger suddenly felt dangerous. And somewhere inside that growing panic, the killer remained invisible. Fear consumes London. Fear spread quickly through London. Newspapers printed graphic details daily. Rumors flooded the streets. Some claimed the killer was a doctor. Others believed he was insane. Or foreign. Or wealthy. Or hiding among the poor themselves. Nobody knew what to believe anymore. Vigilante groups formed at night carrying whistles and clubs. Citizens patrolled alleyways searching for suspicious men. Women refused to walk alone after dark. Businesses closed earlier. and every shadow began to feel threatening. The press only intensified the hysteria. Victorian newspapers competed aggressively for attention. Graphic sketches filled front pages. Sensational headlines appeared almost daily. For many citizens, fear became entertainment. The murders transformed from crimes into public obsession. People gathered in pubs discussing theories late into the night. Witnesses flooded police stations with conflicting stories. Some swore they had seen the killer vanish into fog-covered alleyways. Others claimed he looked completely ordinary. That idea terrified people the most. The possibility that evil could walk unnoticed through crowded streets. That the killer might not look monstrous at all, but calm, quiet, forgettable. And somewhere inside that chaos, the murderer may have been watching it all unfold. Watching newspapers print his name. Watching police fail repeatedly. Watching an entire city descend into paranoia. Perhaps enjoying every moment of it. The double event. Then came the night investigators would later call the double event. September 30th, 1888. Shortly after 1 a.m. Elizabeth Stride was discovered in Dutfield's yard. Her throat had been cut, but unlike previous victims, her body had not been mutilated. Some investigators believed the killer had been interrupted before he could continue. If that theory was true, it meant something deeply disturbing. The killer was still nearby. Still moving through Whitechapel. Still hunting. Less than an hour later, another body was discovered. Catherine Eddowes. Found in Mitre Square. This time, the violence escalated beyond anything London had seen before. Her face had been slashed. Her nose partially removed. Triangular cuts carved into her cheeks. A kidney and uterus had been taken from the body. Investigators were horrified. The mutilations no longer felt driven by simple violence. They felt deliberate. Almost theatrical. As if the killer wanted the crimes to be remembered. And perhaps he did. Because after the double event, the murders stopped feeling like isolated attacks. They became something larger. A symbol of fear spreading across Victorian London. Police flooded Whitechapel in massive numbers. Plainclothes officers disguised themselves as laborers and drunks. Random men were stopped and questioned. But despite one of the largest manhunts in British history, the killer continued slipping away. Always disappearing back into the fog. The letters and the suspects. Days after the murders, London received a message. A letter written in red ink arrived at the Central News Agency. The writer mocked police, taunted investigators, and signed the message with a name the world would never forget. Jack the Ripper. Whether the letter was authentic remains unknown even today. Some historians believe journalists created it to increase newspaper sales. But after the letter was published, the name spread everywhere. Jack the Ripper became more than a killer. He became a legend. Days later, another message arrived. This time addressed to George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Inside the package was half of a human kidney. The letter claimed the writer had taken it from one of the victims. The message ended with chilling words. From hell. The public became obsessed. Every week introduced new theories. Doctors, butchers, immigrants, aristocrats, even members of the royal family were accused. Over the next century, more than 100 suspects would be proposed. One of the most discussed names was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant later institutionalized for mental illness. Modern DNA claims have repeatedly attempted to connect him to the murders. But the evidence remains disputed. And once again, certainty disappeared. That uncertainty may be the reason the case never truly died. Because people fear mysteries more than answers. The shadow never disappeared. What makes the Jack the Ripper case endure after more than a century is not just the mystery of who committed the murders. It's what the murders revealed about society itself. Most of the victims were poor women society had already ignored long before they died. Their suffering was ordinary to the people around them. And in many ways, that indifference protected the killer. Even the investigation itself was filled with mistakes. Crime scenes were contaminated by crowds. Evidence was mishandled. Witness accounts contradicted each other. One potentially important clue, a cryptic message written near a crime scene, was erased before sunrise because authorities feared anti-Semitic riots. The city was terrified not only of the killer, but of itself. And perhaps that feels strangely familiar even today. A violent mystery consumed endlessly by media. Fear spreading faster than facts. People obsessed with violence while barely noticing the suffering that existed long before the murders began. In many ways, Jack the Ripper became one of the first modern media monsters. A killer transformed into mythology through newspapers, fear, and public obsession. And after 137 years, the mystery remains unsolved. No confirmed identity. No final answer. Just a shadow moving silently through fog-covered streets at the edge of modern history. And perhaps that's why people still can't let the story go. Because Jack the Ripper represents something deeper than an unsolved crime. He represents the fear that evil can exist quietly beside ordinary life, and disappear long before anyone understands it.